Hey guys, welcome back to RotoCurve.com. I'm Josh Collacchi, here to discuss a little bit more of a learning curve portion of daily fantasy sports. We talked before about how to just construct cash lineups. Now we're going to be talking about how to construct GPP or tournament lineups. Now, first things first, GPP stands for Guarantees Prize Pools. And what they mean is if you go to FanDuel's lobby, you see all these big tournaments. You have $1 million in prizes here. You have 250,000 in prizes here. And these entries with massive sizes. Now, that's what a GPP is. And in order to win these, you're going to have to do some different things, take some risks, and hopefully get a big score on your way to a top cash. Now, how do you do that? That's exactly what we're here to do. So let's get right into it. When constructing a GPP lineup, first things you do is get to this tournament and find out which one you want to enter. For this sake, let's just look at this $2 250K Wednesday NBA shot. You click enter, it brings you to the lineup page, which I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with at this point on FanDuel. You find all the games, find all the positions, and on FanDuel you have 60,000 to get 2 point guards, shooting guards, small forwards, power forwards, and 1 center. In GPPs, there are a lot of different ways you can go about doing things. Some people argue you want to find players that are lower owned that are going to perform well. What that means is guys with lower percentage owned, you're getting points that other people aren't, and that usually propels you to the top of leaderboards. If you can find a guy that's lower owned that does well, that's going to propel you to the top of the GPPs and hopefully for a big cash. Other ways people like to look at it is called stacking. And what we mean by stacking is if you pick a whole bunch of different players from the same game that could have a high potential score, by theory, that's going to give you a lot of points from that game. Now, there's some theories on whether stacking does work, doesn't work. But honestly, if you're going to pick a game that could have a lot of points, it's really going to give you a chance to have a lot of fantasy points as well. So if you go to RotoCurve.com and use these tools, first things you can find are under DFS tools, you have the matchup detector with DVP, game theory, and bargain value. Under game theory, you can find these games with the high over-unders, with good matchups and good pace. Now, if you wanted to stack, the game to stack would be the one at the top of this list with the highest over-under, the highest game rating, highest pace, stuff of that. So for this particular slate, the Clippers at the Golden State Warriors would be the one to stack in GPPs. Now, everybody's going to be doing that. So if in GPPs you want to try to find some guys that are lower owned. So if you go to that game, that means in tournaments, a lot of people are going to have Steph Curry, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul. Most people are going to have Draymond Green and Klay Thompson as well. But in the win a GPP, you're going to need some players that might go under the radar in that game. Now, if you still wanted to get a piece of that game, you could get guys like Jamal Crawford is a good GPP play because he comes off the bench, he'll be lower owned, but he can score. And if you wanted to get a separate piece of guard play, maybe Klay Thompson or JJ Redick who can score as well. Now, the difference between picking players in cash and in tournaments depends on upside. In tournaments, you're looking at the most possible points you can get for the price. You're not really worried about floor, but you are worried about ceiling. You want to get players that have the highest possible ceiling because in GPPs, you're trying to score the most points with the players that you have in your lineup. Now, what differs a player from being a low ceiling or a high ceiling but a low floor player? If you go to point guards, first things first, you're going to find guys like Isaiah Thomas. Now, Isaiah Thomas is a perfect GPP option because if you click on his game log for the Celtics, you can see that he comes off the bench. He rarely plays over 30 minutes, and he hasn't done so far this year in 3 games. He's played 29, 20, 29, and 27. And considering that he comes off the bench, he's always lower owned because most people like to pick players that are starters because they're more sure things. But if you look at Isaiah Thomas, and he's been doing this his entire career, he could have these games where he just absolutely goes off. And you saw that in opening night against the Sixers where he scored 27 points, had 7 assists and 3 steals en route to see this number, 43 fantasy points. And I believe his price was under 7,000 for that game. So you're looking at a guy that had 7 or close to 7 times his salary, and that's what we're looking for on FanDuel. So in order to find these guys, look at their matchups, look and see if there's anybody out. Like for this given slate right now, Michael Carter-Williams will miss this game against the Sixers. So that means a guy under him will go to this game. A guy like Jared Bayless would be a big-time play. He's going to start over Michael Carter-Williams. He's going to be the guy that gets most of the playing time. Now, can you use him in GPPs? Sure. But a good way to look at this and kind of pivot away from that and go for the lower-owned guy would be the other point guard, a guy that has a lot of upside, and that's Greivis Vasquez. Now, if you look at Vasquez, He's a guy that fluctuates a ton. You saw that in his career at Maryland when he was a college player and when he was with the Raptors as well. And he's done so far this year. In 4 games, you've seen 27 minutes, 25 minutes. He only had 14 and 17. And 17 minutes against the Wizards, he only had 7.9. But in that first game against the Knicks, he went off. Look at that, 18 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and he only turned the ball over twice en route to a game of 31.9 FanDuel points. Those are the kind of players and those are the kind of production from players that you can use to get propel yourself into GPP wins, because these guys are players that are going to be lower owned. Travis Vasquez is likely to come off the bench because Jared Bayless is going to be starting. But he still has that upside, and he's going to play a lot of minutes against a team like Philadelphia. Now, the other guys to find in GPPs, or if you want to pay up for players, because you're going to need a guy that scores the most possible points. And that's the thing I look for. Find the guy that you think is going to score the most given points on a slate. Usually these are the most expensive guys, but find that one guy. Could it be Steph Curry? Of course. Could it be Russell Westbrook? Of course. So if you wanted to find that guy who is your number one player, be sure to get him. And just because, for the sake of this video, let's put Russell Westbrook in our lineups at the other point guard spot. Now you're going to have 2 point guards here in Vasquez and Russell that are combined for about $1,500 and $15,100 for FanDuel, but both of them have elite upsides. We saw what Vasquez can do, and we all know what Russell Westbrook can do. So both of these players have very high ceilings, and that's exactly what we're looking for in GPPs. Now, Vasquez does have a very low floor as well, but in GPPs, we're looking to take a risk, and we're trying to find these guys to score the most possible points. Now, another thing to look at in GPPs is you usually want to be one position where you punt. And what punt means is if you find a guy that's really cheap, or you find 2 guys that are really cheap that have lead upside, put them into your lineups, and then you can afford to maybe get not just one top player like Westbrook, but maybe you can get a second one like James Harden. In order to find a punt, you're going to want to find a guy that maybe comes off the bench or his price isn't priced too high. Then he has a lead upside. And for this given slate, a guy like Evan Fournier could definitely do the job. This guy's played an average of over 40 minutes in the last 3 games. He's been the only Magic player that have played an entire half. He played an entire half on one of the games recently. So this would be a guy that has a lead upside. As you can see, 44 fantasy points, 27 and 34. He's played a lot of minutes, but his price is only $4,500. Now, what that can do for you is can really increase the amount of value you have for your remaining players. Fournier would be a higher-owned player because he is low price. He had been performing well. But sometimes you have to get these players into your GPP lineups because they're low price and they have the possibility to score a ton of points. Now, what you can do with that is if you have a cheap player, you can spend up on an expensive player that has a lead upside. And that would be a guy like James Harden, who we've seen score 50 points in a game. We've seen him score 60 points in a game. This guy has the possibility to do pretty much anything on the basketball court. Now, it's always risky paying up for a guy like that, but if you can get a player that has a ton of upside like Harden and you can afford it, and that's exactly what rostering guys like Fournier can do, it gives you a good chance to put together a good GPP lineup for the most possible points. Now moving on to small forward. Small forward is a position that has a ton of players that are safe, but not exactly a ton of players with a lead upside. Now what I mean by safe is if you just looked in our cash games, guys like Al-Farouq Aminu, guys like Trevor Ariza, guys like Harrison Barnes, these are guys that do a little bit of everything, but they don't do one thing particularly well. So at small forward, it's going to be tough to find that. The way that I look at things is sometimes people are positioned in the wrong position on FanDuel, considering what they do play. Like, for example, Hollis Thompson is a shooting guard. He's at 3,900. And with the news that Robert Covington not being able to play for this particular game for the Sixers, Thompson is likely to start at small forward. Now, he's a shooting guard by nature, which means he scores a lot, he takes a lot of shots. So he would be a guy that you could put into a GPP lineup because he does have that upside. But Hollis Thompson's never going to score 30 or more points in a game simply because he's not going to get the minutes and he's not the main focal point of that offense. But if there's a guy at a similar price that could do the same thing, that would be a guy you would want to put in your lineup. Now, for this given slate, there doesn't seem to be a guy like that. But if you want to look at other players in similar prices that do come off the bench and score a lot, like Corey Brewer, guys like CJ Miles, or Otto Porter. All these players are players that score a lot and have potential to take a lot of shots. What I mean by that, if you go to CJ Miles' game log, you see he doesn't contribute much in rebounds, assists, blocks, or steals, and that makes his value very volatile. But he does score a lot. You see, at 18 points. There were some games last year where he scored in the 30s. So he would be a player that you would like to use in GPPs because he does have that upside to score a lot of points, but he also has a low floor, and that makes him lower owned as well. So for the sake of this video, we go back down to Thompson. I do expect him to start for this given slate. A player like Thompson is a good way to put in your lineups because he can get you 20 or 30 points. And at that price, that's a good way to look at things. Now, look at that. We still have 2 stars, Russell Westbrook and James Harden, but we have a pretty good amount of money to spend. Now, if you want to go to some other players at small forward, as I just mentioned, there are a lot of players that are safe, but not necessarily high upside guys. If you want to pick a guy that has a ton of upside, like a Carmelo Anthony, who is an elite GPP play, simply because you've seen him score 50 points in a game, he can grab 10 rebounds, but he can also have a poor game as well. So I think he makes for a nice play in GPPs because he's going to be lesser owned going against LeBron James, but you know that Carmelo Anthony still has one of the top scoring abilities in the NBA, as you can see in game logs where he just scored 37 points here. Now, you can get a guy that can drop 50 FanDuel points, and you compare him with Hollis Thompson, who can get you 20 or 30. It's going to make for a very big score. Now, you see in this lineup in particular, you got Anthony, Harden, Russell Westbrook. That means you're going to have to get some cheap players, but you already have them. So you're more than halfway through your lineup. You have upside at every position. That's exactly what we want to see. Moving on to power forward. Power forward's an interesting spot because there really aren't a ton of guys that take a lot of shots. And when they are, they're guys like Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge who are priced very highly. Now, what I like to do with power forward in GPPs is find those guys that come off the bench that can score. These are guys like Kristaps Porzingis. These are guys like Tristan Thompson. Markieff Morris can score. Jabari Parker, he's on minutes limit at this particular time, but he can score as well. And if you go down farther, find guys like Luis Scola, who's a very good GPP play because he can come off the bench, play a ton of minutes, score a ton of points, and grab rebounds as well. Let's look at his game log real quick. Opening night, 17 minutes, no points, 8 rebounds. That's not what you want. Now, the thing is with Scola, look at his last game. 19 points, 12 rebounds. He played 31 minutes. The way that Scola plays his entire career is he's had either 30 points or he's just been really, really low in terms of production. Now, in a good matchup, we talked about before with the game theory, you're looking at Luis Scola against Oklahoma City. So Toronto is going to have to score a lot of points. So Luis Scola's offensive production at just 4,100 makes him an interesting play in GPP because, as you can see, he scored just under 39 FanDuel points. His price is 4,100. He can definitely do that again. So if you can return close to 10 times salary, that's a good way to look at it. Now, his floor is low, but he's going to be lower owned coming off the bench, and he has the lead upside. So he makes for a nice play in a GPP as well. This leaves you with 2 players, and as always, if you want to round out your lineup, look at a few guys that have a lead upside. Move on to center real quick. There aren't many centers that score a lot, but these centers that do score are the ones you want to find. These are guys like Jahlil Okafor. These are guys like Enes Kanter, Brook Lopez, and even Nikola Vucevic, who all these guys have the opportunity to score, and they have elite ability offensively because guys like DeAndre Jordan, guys like Tyson Chandler, they don't have the scoring ability to get you 30 points to match with those double-digit rebounds to get you 50 or more points in a GPP, which is something that you need. So look at guys that score like Enes Kanter. As you can see, fluctuated a bit, but he had 15 points, 16 rebounds off the bench. He had some 30-point games last year as well. So he would be a good fit off the bench against a team like Toronto that has some bigs. But for this particular exercise, I think a guy like Jahlil Okafor at 5,700 makes for a good GPP play because, as you saw in college, he's an elite scorer. He's done it so far this year. And he has a matchup against Greg Monroe in Milwaukee. Be sure to keep an eye on matchups and GPPs as well. Monroe struggles a lot defensively. So this could be a night where Okafor scores 30 points, and at just 5,700, that makes for a good GPP play. We have 7,300 left. So if you go to the position you haven't filled in yet, look at the prices you have left and find the guy that has the most possible upside. That's what we're looking for. I think Serge Ibaka makes for a nice upside play, and Markieff Morris does as well. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to plug Serge Ibaka in there. And if you look at the entire lineup, if you're okay with all the upside there, that makes for a good GPP lineup. Vasquez, Westbrook, both have upside. Fournier, Harden, both have upside. All these guys are in good matchups so far. Hollis Thompson, Carmelo Anthony. All these players here have the upside you need. They also have low floors, but in GPPs, we're looking for guys that can score a lot of points. We're looking for guys that can contribute in different ways. But the players that we really want to see are guys like Carmelo, James Harden, Westbrook. All these guys have the chance to drop 50 or more FanDuel points, and you need a few guys of those in their lineup. In order to do that, you need the cheap players that are able to let you fit those guys. These are the Scolas of the world, the Hollis Thompsons, and the Fourniers. So this pretty much wraps up what we're going to look for in GPPs. If you like all of the players in your lineup that have a lot of upside, that's exactly what makes for a GPP play. Now, you're going to want to have one or two guys that are going to be low owned, because if they go off, they can really propel you to the top. That's exactly what we see here with Vasquez, with Hollis Thompson, or even with Luis Scola. That wraps up our GPP lineup video for this. If you have any questions, be sure to get at me on RotoCurve or on Twitter at Josh Collacchi. And be sure to ask any questions anywhere. We'll be sure to answer them on RotoCurve as well. Be sure to go over to RotoCurve.com, check out all the free tools, all the analysis. There's a ton of data up there for not just NBA, but all those sports. So be sure to take advantage of it, and good luck, everybody, in DFS.